the SR20 DET, a lightweight, aluminum, low displacement engine made popular by its ability to take heavy abuse in many different genres of racing, whether that's circuit racing, even drag racing, especially in drifting. Hell, it's the engine that powered the cars at the first ever drift event held outside of Japan, when Keiichi Tsuchiya and several other famous Japanese racers came over to Willow Springs in California to do a demo. And then we got the GT86, BRZ, FRS. Let's face it, the FA20 isn't exactly the strongest and most tunable engine in the world, but don't get me wrong, it has its upsides, such as the flat position of the cylinders allowing the center of gravity of the car to sit very low. Also, it is much newer than the SR20 DET, and due to its age, the SR is getting more and more expensive as the years pass. Spare parts continue to dwindle, and I can't even think of the amount of times I've seen I just blew up my SR20 type thumbnail show up on my YouTube feed. Spend a couple of hours watching vloggers talk about their SR20 issues, and you may just come to the conclusion that SRs suck ass. But you have to keep in mind that by the time your favorite TikTok man picked up his engine from the sketchy importer, there's a very high chance that that engine's had a long life passing through several different owners who've abused the absolute shit out of it, and it took it. Very similar to the FA20, as long as you didn't get some weird factory defect. If you do the proper maintenance and leave it mostly stock, the SR20 DET is a solid engine and actually has something that, the FA20 doesn't have, a turbo, which is the main reason why people even think about swapping this engine into the GT86. The best version of the SR20 DET was equipped with a Garrett T28 ball bearing turbo, pushing out a whopping 250 horsepower. And that's already a huge difference compared to the 200 horsepower that comes on that stock non-turbo FA20 in the GT86. Also, unlike the fairly fragile FA20, the SR20 is an absolute tuner's dream from the factory, being able to support up to about 400 horsepower relatively safely with a good tune and some bolt-ons. And this is without even having to touch the internals. And for the younger guys, bolt-ons basically just refers to kind of the external mod pieces that you see, like an intake or an exhaust or a new intercooler setup, stuff like that. Now let's say you try to squeeze 400 horsepower out of a stock internal FA20 with something like a supercharger kit or a turbo kit. Well, that thing's just going to turn straight into butter. And you may hear a guy on a forum somewhere, you may have read like, oh dude, I daily my stock internal 400 horsepower FA20, it's great bro, it's mint. That's a little sketchy. And it's sure as hell not going to hold up to anything like drifting or any kind of racing. With the FA20, you need to build the internals if you want to push any kind of power out of it, really. So you want some power, but the FA20 is kind of weak, and let's say you don't want to put a turbo kit on it for whatever reason. What happens if you combine the fresh, modern ZN6 with the iconic SR20 DET? And how would you even go about that if you wanted to? Well, today, boys, we're going to find out. I'm about to call up the only person in America that successfully completed this swap. He's going to tell us both how to do it and if he recommends other people to go down this path. Here's Pablo's beautiful Futago line kitted FRS. He drifts in Texas at Knuckle Up. And yeah, that's a whole ass SR20 in the engine bay. I think there's a couple of other guys in the US who've planned to do this swap, but the only other picture I have of a complete, running SR20 and a GT86 is this one from Japan. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen this one on Instagram. He's very popular, very clean build. And also Pablo has several years of experience driving an S14 and messing with SR20, so he's really the best person we can, get in contact with to kind of tell us his opinion on this whole swap. All right, let's give Pablo a call. All right, guys, we got Pablo here with us. Thank you so much for being with us, bro.
What's going on? Thank you for having me.
So how long ago did you start thinking about doing this swap?
2016, 2017, just around that time. I liked how the car felt, but it was just super slow.
So you got to drive the car stock for a while with the stock engine. I didn't know that. I thought you just bought a shell.
No, this one, all right, so this one was a shell. My first one was an automatic one because I didn't want to drift that car. I just wanted a nice daily.
It's not like you just bought a shell, you're an ass chassis guy, and you're like, oh, I'm just going to throw an SR20 in it. You've actually gotten to feel the FA20 and realize that you want something a little more.
I drove it like that for 3 years, and then I sold the car, and then I jumped back into an S chassis.
Okay, so I'm gonna say, in my opinion, you kind of started thinking about this swap a little bit before these cars started getting, I guess, cooler again. I mean, I don't know, but like I feel like more recently, within the past like 2 or 3 years, people started styling them more like an S chassis and stuff. So when you first had this idea of like SR20 swapping this FRS, what did your S chassis driving friends think of you doing this?
Like, I had talked about doing it, and they're like, why do you want to do it? And I was just like, this chassis needs a little something different. This motor kind of suits it more.
What SR20 did you end up going with? I know there's like red top, black top, all that stuff.
Just a red top. So I ended up rebuilding a motor top to bottom. I just had room to like do a project, and I found a shell for $1,500, and it actually made everything kind of like fall into place. Like, I had talked about it, and it wasn't really gonna happen. I just roamed Facebook Marketplace, and I found a shell. I didn't think it was gonna happen that fast, and ended up going to pick up a shell, and here we are.
When you started doing the swap, what components did you have to fab up yourself, and what stuff was already like out there available for this kind of a swap?
The only thing that I was able to get for this swap into this chassis was a wiring harness. Besides that, I had to make motor mounts. I had to figure out how to fit the motor, figure out intercooler setup, which I ended up getting an S14 intercooler setup, and I was able to make that work just by like shortening and like rotating a couple of the pipes. Everything else kind of like fell into place the way it routed through the front, behind the headlights and everything. I made my own transmission mount and sent out a drive shaft to get made. I had to make all of my own exhaust for it, and I think those were the craziest parts that I had to figure out. That's what was time consuming because I was recent into fabricating.
Okay.
I bought a welder just to do the swap. And I learned how to fabricate just to do the swap.
That's awesome.
I think that's pretty much it. Everything that you need for a running car. Oh, fuel setup. That was another one. These cars are returnless on the fuel system. So I had to tap into the top pad of the sending unit and pretty much run another complete line straight to the front of the car just to make it a system. Oh, another thing, the shifter felt kind of right into place. I'm still using the stock transmission.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask you, like, how did everything fit in there? Did you have to like bang anything out? Like, how'd the engine fit with the hood and everything?
I cut a little more than I needed to. The motor could go lower.
I'm assuming that's the firewall that you had to cut. Or what did you have to cut?
I had to cut the strut braces that come from the firewall to the shock tower. I don't know if you remember, that has just 2 bars running
Those
forward.
2 bars. So you like cut out the mounts for those or what?
Yeah, I cut out I drilled out the spot welds for the mount on the firewall. Unfortunately, I had to cut the lines for the heater core because the motor sits like maybe I want to say like 1.5 inches off the back firewall, and I had to notch the transmission tunnel a tiny bit.
So what would you say was like the hardest part of the swap? For someone who's never done a swap before, what would you say is the hardest part? For me, just like listening to you talking, I think the thing that would scare me the most was like doing a custom fuel setup.
That was the easiest part.
Was it really?
That was my first, yeah. That was my first setup because it's still running the stock pump. So a really good thing that Wiring Specialty did, they made everything run with the factory setup on the car. Computers and everything on the car still works. So it's just
Wait, really? Like gauges
yeah.
and everything already work? That's awesome.
It's turnkey, so it's not, I don't have to do anything like wire up any switches or anything.
What was the hardest part of the swap?
Figuring out motor mounts. Making the motor mounts was the most time consuming because it was, along with making the motor mounts, I had to figure out how to fabricate and weld. That's why it took so long. Like if I would have taken it to a professional, they would have done it.
They could have done it, yeah.
Yeah, like a week or 2 weeks or something. Like I know that GK Tech now is making some motor mounts, but I don't know. I want to say mounting the motor to the chassis took the longest.
What did you end up making those motor mounts out of?
Steel plates.
Steel plates.
I've kind of made like a little box, and then I got like a puck style mount.
Okay, here's a question. So how long did the swap take compared to how long you thought it was going to take?
I thought it was.
Was it on time? Is the question, I guess.
No. Not at all. I thought it was going to take me a solid 3 months of working. It took me a 1.5 years, but I want to say like it took me an actual year because I ended up moving from Miami to Texas.
Oh, mid-swap, that's when you moved.
Yeah, so we had to push the car up on a trailer, roll it up as a project, and haul it over here.
How well does the engine fit in the bay as far as the hood goes? Does it hit?
It hits.
It's a little bit taller than the F820 since that's a flat 4.
It's the hood, but there's actually a lot of space down there to put that motor in. I think when I revise the mounts, if I end up doing it, be able to lower it just so it can clear the hood properly.
All right, so you mentioned that the wiring harness, you got it from Wiring Specialties, right? It's turnkey, all the gauges work. Were you able to keep all the like other factory amenities like AC? Like what did you lose with the swap?
I lost heat.
Okay, yeah, because you said you hit the heater core because it was,
Yeah, I had to cut the lines that come out of the firewall for the heater core. I probably could have kept it. I probably could do something if I took the time, pull out that heater core, weld like some fittings, some 90-degree fittings. It doesn't have AC now, but I got the Wiring Specialties harness with the capability to put on an AC system in it. Out of functionality in the car with that harness, I didn't lose much. So inside everything still works. My radio, my gauges, my lighting, fuel gauge, temp gauge on the dash.
Did you ever like even think of kind of throwing together your own wiring harness, or did you always have a plan to go with Wiring Specialties?
I thought about it, and that was like when you asked me like what do my friends think, it's like, oh, what are you gonna do for wiring? Because at most points, a lot of people that do swaps into these cars just get rid of everything and start doing like from scratch, chassis harness that they gotta make everything, a bunch of relays and circuits and stuff. And I was like, damn, I do not want to go through all that work.
Yeah, that sounds like hell.
Yeah, like that in its own is a couple months of work. I think that would have taken me longer than putting the motor in it. That would have been my number one answer. Like, what was the hardest part of wiring?
Oh yeah, I bet, dude. Yeah, no, thank God for wiring specialties, definitely.
Yeah.
So after doing this swap, was the fun factor of getting to get creative with, building a car from scratch, along with like running an interesting engine, worth the hassle? Like if you had to do it again, I guess would you advise someone to spend more money on a well-maintained stock engine car and maybe turbo it down the line? Like what was it worth it? Was it worth it
For
for you?
me, in the position that I was in,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
because I got a shell.
Okay.
Now I've gotten asked the question of like, oh, do you think it's worth it? Like, do you think it's worth it if doing it into my car? And I'm like, is your car running?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they say, yes, I drive it all the time. And I'm like, well, then no. Like, I wouldn't do it now. Like, just enjoy your car as much as possible.
Mm.
Learn a lot of things. Like if you're getting into drifting, learn a lot of things with the car now. Maybe one day your engine's gonna blow and then you have parts already saved up. Like, if you really want to do it, start accumulating the parts. If I drive this car a lot every day, definitely not doing it.
You don't think you daily an SR20 swap to FRS?
That was my original plan. I was gonna daily this car, but given all the time that I put into it, it's a little scary to daily it. If something happens to the car, like all that work is just gone. I have to start over with another one. But driving this car on the street definitely feels good. The SR doesn't make it uncomfortable to drive. It's just how low I had the car. That's what made it uncomfortable to drive.
Yeah, well, you gotta have it low. You got that Fatago kit on there too. Like you can't be
Yeah,
monster truck fit, man.
exactly.
How much did the swap cost you, if you could estimate?
I think I got it just before the pandemic started. I got the shell and then I started to get into the actual swap. I think at the end it ended up being around like 16,000 just in all the major parts.
Yeah, and
From
that's
the shell to the motor to the intercooler, the harness, drive shaft, exhaust bits. Yeah, I think it ended up being just around 16,000 just to get it running.
and the prices of those engines and stuff has just jumped up since you bought it,
Yeah.
probably, huh?
So this motor is put together from 3 different motors, and I got the crank from one, I got the block from another, and the head from another.
Mm-hmm.
And I built this motor and I made it work. That cut down the price a lot. I think on any other given day, this would cost somebody just about like $20,000 to do.
Yeah, without man hours too.
Yeah,
And having
exactly.
space to
Without the
do it.
fabrication hours.
Yeah. So everyone always compares these cars to S chassis, and I think you're probably the best person I could possibly ask this next question. Once you got the car dialed in, how did it feel compared to an S chassis?
This chassis is lighter and it's snappier because it feels like it has like a little more rigidity to the car. So it feels faster in a sense, but it's just because everything's happening so quickly compared to an S chassis. The ratios
Because of the
compared to
wheelbase
an
and
S,
stuff.
yeah, this car just rotates really fast compared to an S chassis where you can kind of make it rotate a little bit slower. I mean, you could do the same thing with an S chassis, make it rotate really fast, but this car is just on its own gonna snap right into like angle faster than an S chassis is.
Did you find yourself enjoying driving this car more than you did your last S chassis in any ways, or
No,
what do you think? No? No?
no, there's just so many memories behind the S14 that I think
Okay.
it's hard to.
Okay.
Like this car I've only driven here, but the S14, I drove it all up and down Florida.
So a lot of memories attached to it kind of played into that
Yeah,
factor too. Okay.
yeah, that
Fair
car's
enough.
got some drift miles in it.
All right. So what did you run as far as angle on this car?
I wanted to do something simple, so I kind of went with like the theory of how you would do like an S chassis,
Okay.
and I just put PBM knuckles on it and extended outer tie rods.
And did you find that to be enough?
Yeah, that's more
Yeah.
than enough for me. The only thing is you got to run narrow front wheels if you don't want to hit anything, or put spacers on it. A lot of people put extended lower control arms. I wanted to reduce the amount of aftermarket parts that I put on it, so I just put a knuckle on it, and that's what I wanted.
All right, Pablo. So after all of this, you decided that you want to sell the car. It's for sale. Why is that? And where can people contact you to buy it off you?
I mean, if you're really interested in the car, you can hit me up in my DMs on my Instagram page on goodchoice.tm. And I'm currently asking 18,000 or best offer for it. I didn't crazy overprice the car because I know it is a swap car, but it's mostly a drift car. A lot of people keep asking for like a street car or something that they want to drive around a lot, which you can do, but it's kind of, a little iffy to do that. I decided to sell it because I have kind of interest in something else. I'm either interested in buying an S15 and storing it for like a year and importing it, and then a C35 for my girlfriend. Like if I sell this car, it'll work out for both of us. S15 has always been like an end goal car for me.
There you go. Yeah.
People see this and I did all the work to it and they ask why I'm getting rid of it. Like this is kind of like your car, but I mean, somebody else can enjoy it too.
Yeah, exactly, bro. Exactly. And it's a
So
good deal. I think it's a good price. So yeah, no, y'all make
yeah.
sure to hit up Pablo, and yeah, thank you so much for being on, bro. Seriously. I
All
appreciate
right.
that.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
All right, man. Yeah, you
I'll
have a
talk
good
to
one.
you.
There you have it, boys. To conclude, this kind of swap is best for someone who really has a very deep passion for the SR20 and has the skills or money to get it done the right way. As these engines rise in both age and price, it just becomes more and more apparent that it might be a better idea to just go ahead and run a low boost setup on the FA20, maybe with a turbo kit. I personally really like that HKS turbo kit. And maybe soon we can explore the world of K-swaps together. But for those of you that yearn for the style, and can't live without the beautiful sound of a turbo SR20, I don't blame you at all. Good luck to you, and hopefully this video has helped to kind of push you along the right track. Also, go ahead and check out the full build breakdown of this car on Pablo's channel. I'll have that link down below, as well as his Instagram if you want to contact him about maybe purchasing the car. Like he said, it's for sale. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Next week, we're actually going to visit another country in Asia that's not Japan to check out some really cool GT86 builds. So look forward to that one. All right, boys, as always, here's my IG here if you want to follow along. This is the best way to keep up with uploads. Yeah, see you guys next week.